Florida is now the third most populous state. When we moved here from Texas in the 50s, Waco was a bigger dot on the map than Orlando was. Now, within 30 miles of Orlando are more people in the whole state of Wyoming. I say this because in Florida, we don't have a lot of continuity on places. We got patches that we don't know where they're from or what they're for. All right, how's your Florida geography? There's Tampa, south of Tampa is Sarasota, where it was the headquarters of Sunnyland Council. In the 20s, south of that is Naples, and the Naples group separated to form their own council, Royal Palm Council, and they had their own scout camp. And then in the 30s, they couldn't make it, so they got reabsorbed back into Sunnyland Council. Well, I have a good friend in Atlanta, and he contacted me once. A guy in South Carolina had a patch he had, but South Carolina didn't have anything that he wanted. But Atlanta knew that I had something he wanted. So Atlanta said, Rick, how about a three-way trade? You send me your item, I'll send my item to South Carolina, and he'll send you this patch from Camp Ropico. I said, what? Never heard of it. But I collected Florida. I said, okay, let's do that. So we did a three-way trade, and this patch fell into my lap. Well, when I visit councils, I like to take along my patches from that council and show them what I have, because they likely never have seen a lot of it. When I took this down to a OA event, they were interested in seeing it. They knew about Royal Palm Council. Some of them had even heard of Camp Ropico, but they had never seen a patch before. A year or two later, I went down there again, and a young man told me, he was a former lodge chief, he was talking about scouting at work, and a lady at work said, oh, I was in scouts when I was young. He said, yeah? She said, yeah, I went to Camp Ropico. He said, really? He said, did they have any patches? She said, yes, they did. Well, can you bring him in and show them to me? Well, she didn't want to do that. She said he would have to go to her house, which he did, went to the door. She wouldn't let him in the house, but she showed him 3 patches at the door, and this patch is the middle one. Later on eBay, Tico came across this pamphlet for a Camp Ropico songbook, and it's not hard to get a postcard that pictures the council office for Royal Palm Council. This is the oldest known Florida camp patch. This is the only known one, except for those 3, and we don't know where they are. Well, like I said, Royal Palm Council got absorbed back into Sunnyland Council, and there's a history written by a retired council executive, so we know their summer camp kind of bounced around. This felt patch is from Bear Point. Then they acquired property on the Baden River and had a permanent place for Camp Flaming Arrow. One time I'm sitting at my desk at work and a man comes in. His father-in-law was a retired scouting professional and had worked down there. His father-in-law gave him these pins from Flaming Arrow, and the man gave them to me. Oh, wow, well, all right, sure. They were staff pins. Bill Granger has been active in scouting away for 50 years. Bill says when he was on staff in 67, that's when he got his staff pin. He didn't know they went all the way back to the 40s, and I've never seen them anyplace else. If you're collecting Camp Flying Eagle, it's got to be a real bear looking for the arcs. The upper left patch, 1944, is a Snapper Creek. That's the oldest stated summer camp patch from South Florida Council. Snapper Creek is now an exit on the Florida Turnpike, south of Miami. I was at a OA event in 79, and an old man came up to me and says, well, I brought some old camp patches because I thought the boys would like to see them. And he pulled these feather patches out of his pocket. They were all crumpled up like dollar bills. I'd never seen them before. But once he showed them to me, I knew they existed and knew to look for them. I was able to get white, gold, and red, but it was 30 years before I saw another indigo feather. And then on eBay, it was a whole frame. It was somebody's scouting career. All the patches he'd ever done, including an indigo one. Fortunately, I got it instead of a sniper took out the 1 or 2 patches I wanted from the frame, sold the rest of the frame, and got most of my money back. So counting the one the old man had, that's one of 2 or 3 known indigo feathers. Now these were achievement patches, not honoraries. I asked the old man, well, what did you have to do to earn them? He said he didn't remember. Snapper Creek, the last dated Snapper Creek patch was 56. I show this to you because here you see a Rocky Pine camp. That's South Florida's segregated scout camp. Later on, South Florida Council acquired a huge property northwest of Orlando they call McGregor-Smith Scout Reservation. Now, there was a time when in Florida, the idea was councils were going to have a scout reservation with multiple camps on it. They started out with Lone Oak and did fine. And then they were going to have a Camp Osprey and had a patch for it, but nothing ever came from it. South Florida Council, they were having a financial tight time for a while in the 70s. They were on COD with National Supply for advancement patches. So they never did anything to build Camp Osprey except have a patch for it. They had McGregor-Smith Scout Reservation for 30 years. They never built a dining hall. They put in a pool. They put in an administration building. They put in a trading post. Finally, they sold it to the Florida Soil and Water Conservation District. The camp was 7.5 hours from the council office in Miami. People didn't go there for weekend camping. They couldn't have cub events there. It was really kind of far to do anything about it. A footnote on McGregor-Smith, in the 80s, some committee at the national office decided that individual scout camps for councils somehow was not cost effective. So they were going to have 2 mega camps in Florida, huge reservations, and all the camping would be there. One would be at Baden-Powell Scout Reservation or Jacksonville. The other would be McGregor-Smith. Well, that idea never got off the ground. Before there was Gulf Ridge Council, it was Gulf Council in Tampa, and there was a Ridge Council that went down Central Florida. The highest part of Peninsula Florida is called the Ridge area. It's about 600 feet above sea level compared to Orlando, that's maybe 60 feet above sea level. Their summer camp patch name was Camp Flaming Arrow. And here we Camp Flaming Arrow with 3 bars, Camp Flaming Arrow with 4 bars. But we don't know where they ever had it because they never had a permanent location. They'd have it at a park. They'd have it at a national forest. They'd have it in the unused acreage of a friendly rancher. And it moved around. Now look at the lower left. This patch with a CFA appeared on eBay. It came with documentation, which I show on the right. I took a shot and acquired the patch because the documentation is from a scout from Dania, which is a community on the east coast of Florida, kind of in the West Palm Beach area. Small little town. Now, something on the coast would not have been in Ridge Council, but don't scouts cross council borders when it comes to going to a summer camp patch. And in fact, that the name of the scout on the patch is on the internet. I looked him up. He became a doctor, a physician. He became active in local politics. He became active in civic affairs, and he has a park named after him. So that lower left patch, is that a Camp Flaming Arrow patch? I don't know, but it seems good enough to me. The top 2 patches are later patches from Camp Flaming Arrow from the 40s. On the bottom are a variety of alligator patches from Camp Owen Brorein, which belonged to Gulf Council. Owen Brorein, about 20-25 miles northwest of Tampa. We've got good documentation on that camp because in the early 70s, a Scouts Eagle project was to create a history of Camp Owen Brorein. These numbered patches on the left are patches from the 50s, 1, 2, 3, 4 with trees, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 with humps. There's not a lot of complete sets here. I put these together, amazingly, at a national OA conference. I'm sitting there trading, and friends come up and said, Rick, you need this one. Why, yes, I do. Rick, do you need this one? Why, yes, I do. Rick, do you need this one? Why, yes, I do. It was amazing. I completed practically a whole set with friends at a national OA conference. These are the patches through the 50s and early 60s. The blue one in the bottom right is what they had by the middle of the 60s. In the early 60s and 64, they acquired property to create a permanent place for Camp Flaming Arrow. But I show this page to you to look at the patch in the center. Flaming Arrow Scout Ranch, 1956. What in the world? There was no location for a Flaming Arrow in 56. Where did this happen? How long did it last? How many people went? Nobody knows. Why do I have this patch? A friend went to a North Carolina tradery, saw it in somebody's shoebox and said, oh, Rick might be interested in this patch. So he got it and brought it back for me. Later on, 2 or 3 have appeared. Tico, I think Tico has one. Why does this patch exist? Nobody knows. The leather tab on the bottom, what's that for? When was it? Nobody knows. I described to you the reservation camp idea. Well, they have all this land, so of course they're going to have multiple camps on the property, and they came up with a patch for projected Camp Hampton, which never materialized. If you have the patch on the left, you have a complete set of Camp Hampton, which never existed. The benefactor for Flaming Arrow Scout Reservation was George Jenkins, who was the founder and owner of Publix, which is a big supermarket chain in Florida. Their corporate logo was where shopping is a pleasure. He paid for their first dining hall, and they came up with a patch for the projected Camp George Jenkins, which never happened. So if you have this patch, you have a complete set of patches for Camp George Jenkins. And we go to St. Petersburg. Their camp was Camp Soule. They were given a huge piece of property in the late 30s. In the course of time, they had to sell off pieces of property. A friend of mine once tracked down the backyard, which is where he took his vigil. Right now, you can stand where their ceremonial ring was, and through the trees, see the back porch like somebody's house. But the core property, the developed part with the dining hall and the waterfront, is only 45 minutes away from downtown St. Pete. So they retained that part. They use it for Cub events, they use it for banquets, they use it for meetings. That's still convenient. On the top right is Camp Reed. Camp Reed was their segregated scout camp, and it was kind of interesting. Okay, you've got Camp Soule with the dining hall and the waterfront and the trading post, and then the parking lot, and then the gate. And just on the other side of the gate was a grassy area. That's where Camp Reed was. So the Black Scouts would stay at Camp Reed, wake up in the morning, go through the gate, use the dining hall, use the waterfront, use the rifle range, and then come back through the gate and go back to Camp Reed. Camp Reed patches are around. That's not the rarity. The rarity is the top left. I'm at an OA function, and an old friend comes up to me and says, hey, Rick, I thought you'd like to have these. And he gave me the 43 and the 44 patches. I said, where did you get these? He said, well, you know, I deal in antiques. So I was at a flea market, walking through it, looking for stuff. And I saw a scout shirt with these 2 patches on it. And it occurred to me that you like this kind of stuff, so I got it for you. I said, wow, what did you pay for the shirt? Oh, just $5 or $10. I said, this is pretty cool. He said, yeah, actually, there was another shirt with the same patches on it. I said, why didn't you get that one too? He said, oh, I didn't think you needed more than one. Later on, the shirt with a 42 patch appeared on eBay. I bought it, took off the patch I wanted. It still had a Camp Reed patch on it. So I sold the shirt with a Camp Reed patch on it. Those staff strips are the only known staff strips. Later on, this appeared on eBay. This is a pre-OA honorary. We've got the patches for it, and we've got documentation, a newspaper clipping. I said, wow, this is pretty awesome. Well, I know the POA stuff goes for the big bucks. So I put in a bid for it, and I was the only bidder. I won it. Later on, I learned that other people in the country know about these patches. Some people might have one or two of them. One person actually has all three and knew it was a POA honorary and knew it was from Pinellas area. Well, I took what you see and made color copies and took it to a tradery over there. Nobody had ever heard of the tribe of Muskogee. Nobody had ever heard of a POA honorary in that council. Coincidentally, the newspaper article lists several names, and I was actually acquainted with one of the names 30 years later in a Native American kind of category. Camp Osborne is down near West Palm Beach. They acquired the property in the 30s, and because they used the same patch several years, they never made patches with dates on them. I acquired the one with a 42 on it because I thought it was cool to have a patch with a year on it. Seems pretty authentic to me. The gray one was one they used in the 50s. You see the Camp Osborne strip under the dome patch. That was on a scout shirt. And when I got that, that was the only one known. One or two others have appeared since then. Well, in the mid-50s, they knew they had to do something because they were getting complaints. Where that camp was getting overgrown. Neighbors were complaining that a scout bugle was waking them up too early. Well, at that time, they were plotting out some area to be a state park, Jonathan Dickinson State Park, and they set aside a big area for a scout camp, and that became Tanah-Keeta Scout Reservation. On the right is a patch from their segregated scout camp. Frederick Small was the man who gave them the money, $1,000, to buy some property in the late 40s. And that's where they had their segregated camp, and they held the property until 1970 when it got sold. I think there may be one known Camp Small patch in Florida, with maybe others someplace else. This is my council, Central Florida Council. Sometimes I'd meet older scouters who said they camped in Central Florida in the early 30s. And I said, well, did you have a patch? Yes, they did. Well, what was in the patch? I said, oh, just a standard camper patch. Once I even met a widow who had her husband's shirt, and on it was a Region 6 standard camper patch. Well, first of all, I didn't take very good notes. I don't remember exactly what standard camper patch I saw, so I collected them all. And these are all the Region 6 standard camper patches that there are. So whatever Central Florida Council used had to have been out of these. Now let's talk about the little things on the bottom. Those are felt arrows with a felt W on them. I took a girl to the junior and senior prom, and after college, we got together. I went to her house to visit, and her father heard me talking about scouts. He said, oh, would you like to see my merit badge sash? Well, yeah, of course. So I went and got it and showed it to me. The patch on the lower left was on his merit badge sash, along with a 1935 Jamboree patch. He was from Central Florida. He says they were all set to go to the 35 Jamboree. They had the money, they had the gear. When the Jamboree was canceled, they went to Cuba for 2 weeks instead. He assured me that's the patch he got when he went camping in Central Florida. And I figured the patch had to be older than 1935. Well, this was some time ago, even before color copiers. So I made a black and white copy and colored in with colored pencil. When I said, can I borrow the sash to make a copy, he kind of hesitated, but his daughter said, don't worry, Rick's reliable, he'll bring it back. After all, I took Kathy to the prom. Geez. It was 35 years before I saw another one. The one on the lower right appeared on eBay on a merit badge sash with one of the standard camper patches on the sash, and also a 35 Jamboree patch safety pin to the sash. Well, at this time, I'm advisor to the pocket museum we have at camp. I said, we need this. Okay, now I ask you individually, what would a felt camp patch from your council be worth, of which there's only one other known example? Well, I had an acquisition fund for the museum. I had funds to use. So I put on what I thought was a reasonable bid. I said, no, I'm not going to cut corners there. So I went back in and jacked up my bid quite a bit. Well, the bidding worked its way up to about $350. At the last minute, Sniper came in and jumped the bid to $600. Well, that patch sure looks good in our museum because I had a much higher bid waiting. We took the set, and on display now is a sash with that 1935 Jamboree patch, still safety pinned to it. So there's two known of those. One still belongs to the family of the girl I took to the senior prom, and the other one is in our museum at camp. Yay. These patches are from our segregated camp patch in Florida. The top left, there are 5 known. One of them is in our museum at camp. The other one is in historical display, the Orange County Historical Display in the former courthouse downtown. There's 5 known of those. Camp Howard on the top right, we didn't know until a man went to a North Carolina tradery and came back with some of them. So we got one for the museum, and I got one, and I think Tico got one. It was a segregated scout camp up through the mid-60s. That's the one with the gold arrow. Then when they stopped having a summer camp there, they still held the property. The property was available for troop camps and camporees. I went to a camporee there once. The bottom 2 patches were sold in the council office. They're round, but I have never seen any Camp Howard, the top right Camp Howard patches, other than the ones that a friend brought back from North Carolina. Until then, the gold background one was the tough one. The Mitchell brothers own some property about an hour north of Orlando, and they make it available to the uses of scouting. Boy Scouts use it, Girl Scouts use it, youth groups use it. They've had camporees there. They've had chapter ordeals there. Its use is administered by a scout troop. No, the property is not owned by the council. But this patch appeared on eBay. We got it for our museum. It's the only one I've ever seen. It went for $75. But why would such an odd piece of property even have a patch? And if you're going to have a patch, why do you only ever see just the one?
Rick, that's where I did my ordeal.
Thank you. This is great documentation. This patch display has been up in the council office in Pensacola for Gulf Coast Council for the last 50 or 60 years. That's how we know what there was. I was able to get one of the 2 felts at a pre-NOAC tradery. I went to the tradery, and that's the only thing I acquired. The camp patch was Camp Big Heart. It was on the property of the Naval Air Station. Look at Camp Big Heart, the end. That's not a camp patch, but the local lodge was having events there annually. And then when it came to where they knew they weren't going to be using the property anymore, they had a patch and put the end on. So if you're collecting the Camp Big Heart patches, you kind of need that one too. That camp was succeeded by Camp Robbins. Camp Robbins was succeeded by the current camp, Spanish Trail Scout Reservation. I'm not going to show that, but I want to make an observation. The property of Spanish Trails is a huge, big rectangle. And when they put in Interstate 10, the interstate cut across a corner of the property. It's remote. You're never going to go there. You're never going to use that corner. But at night, when you're dropping off to sleep in your tent, in the distance, like a waterfall or a running stream, you can hear the sound of the semis going 90 miles an hour on I-10 all night. Camp Sinton, the black and white copy, I don't think that's their segregated scout camp. They don't have one on display either in the council office or at camp. There is 1 or 2 known Camp Sintons, but they're not in Florida. These patches are from Camp ECHOCKOTEE, which is southwest of Jacksonville. On top, you see some little 2-inch square felts, felt lettering on felt squares. There's 4 or 5 of these. They all have different years. They're hard to color copy. What's interesting is that 2 or 3 of the known ones are legacies from grandfathers, which is kind of cool. Camp Francis patch is still owned by the council. It's available for troop camping. And at one time, they did have a segregated scout camp there. That's the only known patch with Camp Francis name on it. And that's the only known patch, which aggravates Tico because I got it from him before he started collecting Florida camp patches.
Does aggravate me a great deal.
I went to a function and they had a pin from Camp ECHOCKOTEE, so I picked it up. Don't know how it was issued. Was it a staff patch? Nobody knows. All right, in the Seminoles, if you were a black slave and had a child by a white man, that child was a slave. If you are a black woman who was a slave of a Seminole and had the Seminoles child, that child was a Seminole. Camp COACOOCHEE was a chief in the early 19th century, and rumor is that he was half black. So when they had a segregated scout camp, they named it after the half black Seminole chief. And the 2 patches in the lower left are from the 70s. Well, a friend went to a North Carolina tradery and a patch showed up. And he said, "Oh, this looks interesting. I bet Rick would like to have this." And he brought the gray patch with a gray background down to me. I'd never seen it before. I showed it to people in that council. They had never seen it before. Since then, 2 or 3 have showed up. Tico, have you acquired one of the gray ones? Okay, so they're there. But until one came to me from North Carolina, I never knew it existed. We know there was a segregated scout camp in North Florida Council called Camp Lincoln. We even kind of know where it was. We don't know when it was, when did it start, when did it end. A trader from outside of Florida asserts that this is a patch for that Camp Lincoln. We don't know for sure, but it's being researched. Orchard Pond is 25 miles west of Tallahassee, and those felt arrowheads at the top go back to the late 30s. Picture on the bottom is a photograph of the only known existent Orchard Pond wings. We have pictures of scouts wearing the wings, but there's only one example. It's on a scout shirt, and it's in the hands of the pocket museum they have at the current camp, Camp Wallwood. They had a segregated scout camp. J.R.E. Lee was a prominent educator for Florida A&M University.
He was their president.
Yeah. The patch on the top is not in Florida. It's the image is gotten off the internet. There are 2 or 3 J.R.E. Lee's neckerchiefs around. Not a lot of them. Cypress Lake is a scout camp patch not issued by scouts. Suwannee River Area Council was between camp properties. They had sold Orchard Pond. They didn't yet have their new property, so they went to a property, Cypress Lake, and that's a patch from it. Our documentation for that is a verbal from Grant Wallen, who is a district executive. He remembers it clearly. It was his first job out of college, and he was a summer camp director for the camp that happened at Cypress Lake. I think there's only 2 known of that patch. Not a lot of people saved extras. Later on, they did have a segregated patch at Clear Lake. Those are the 4 patches for it. The segregated camp lasted at least to the late 50s, but they didn't have any patch dated until later in 52. Now look at those patches. There's no council name on those patches, but the council's patches are documented fairly well because they had a display at their in cases that moved around with them. Now we have these Clear Lake camps. What are these? Where are they from? They don't have a council name on it. I went ahead and traded for them as I saw them, and then later on I did get documentation, which I've saved in the lower right. Clear Lake is a camp that exists up in Wisconsin someplace. So I kept the patches and the documentation to make clear that these are not Florida camp patches. Interesting curiosity items, though. Remember I told you how the people in Naples tried making a go of it out of their own? Well, they tried again in the 60s. Now we're talking Southwest Florida Council. And the black patch was when they tried having a summer camp. In the second year of the council, they said, look, we don't have a camp worth going to. We recommend you go to Flaming Arrow Scout Reservation. So they sent their scouts to Flaming Arrow in 68. So if you're collecting summer camp patches from Southwest Florida Council, you need a patch from Flaming Arrow. That's why that's in here. And Flaming Arrow is going great guns now. The council's done so good that when they merged with Sunnyland, it wasn't a merge, it was an absorption. Southwest Florida Council absorbed Sunnyland Council. Southwest Florida, 4 of its districts were from Southwest Florida Council, and only 2 districts were from Sunnyland. They still have Camp Flying Eagle. They use it for weekends. They use it for OA events. For a few years, they were able to lease the camp to somebody to use for handicap camping. My favorite camp, Camp Sawyer, is down in the Keys. For a while, it was on West Summerland Key, which oddly enough is east of Summerland Key. Just recently, in the last 10 years or so, the name has been changed to Scout Key. Look at the middle patches on the right. They actually crammed a summer camp into Camp Sawyer. You know, Seabase. Seabase used Camp Sawyer as kind of a satellite. Then they decided to take over the property. He was going to, trouble is that district had a man who did research and found out that the land for Camp Sawyer wasn't donated to South Florida Council, wasn't donated to Boy Scouts. It was donated to the youth and adult scouts of that county. So when he found out he couldn't get title to the property, he pulled out completely, bought some property further down the Keys, sent in a bulldozer to rip up some mangroves, which it turns out you cannot do in the Keys without a permit. I ran across this on the internet. You see that piece of land on the bottom? That's Camp Sawyer, except it's only the land to the right of US 1, and it's only the bottom half because the top half is the Girl Scout camp. Just recently, Keys told them they couldn't use their 50-year-old septic tank anymore. So they spent $1 million to put in a 2-story latrine facility where you can pee on the 2nd story and get drinking water out of the tap in the bottom story. And just recently, National has taken over administration of Camp Sawyer. You can still use it, and it's got a lot of improvements to it, but it's not as freewheeling as it used to be. In my remaining time, I'm going to talk about Scout Camp down the Panama Canal. I talked about the population in Florida. Panama had the kids of the American employees of the canal and also kids from the military bases. And they had a lot of military bases. Panama Canal wasn't just a canal, it was a property on both sides of the canal, from one side to the other. So the first camp was presumably someplace in that property. We've run across these patches from El VOLCAN. We don't know exactly where it was, although this patch on the lower right might give us a clue. This patch was used in the 50s. This one, without the date art attachment, was probably used for several years. 62 was the first year they had the property for Camp CHAGRES. CHAGRES is on the shore of the lake they use for a reservoir for the locks. The lake level would go up or down like 35 or 40 feet in the course of a year. This patch is a reproduction from eBay. This patch is a reproduction from eBay. How many people collect Camp CHAGRES where you're going to make the big bucks by reproducing Camp CHAGRES patches? No, I don't know. Of course, camp's not going to last very long. Camp only had a big pavilion. They had a cinder block cube with blank windows and doors. They said it was the staff quarters. And they had a water tank up on a hill. The area was very hilly. And every summer, the military would come in and fill the tank, and that was the water for a summer camp, a week for Boy Scouts and a week for Girl Scouts. These weren't dated. Me and a couple of friends went down to CHAGRES in the 70s, and they told us what the correct order for some of these patches. Well, when they gave up Panama Canal, they also had to give up the property. So they had to give up the land CHAGRES was on, which immediately wasn't used by anybody. Oh, this appeared on the internet. I snagged to show you a picture. Their council office never sold all those strips at the same time, but it looked interesting to me. If you're going to collect them, good luck. Camp CHAGRES was in the canal zone. When it stopped being the canal zone, when it became the Panama Canal Council, they had to move the camp. They found property, and they call it GAMBOA Camp. And GAMBOA Camp was on military property someplace. They told me that one year it was in the back property of an unused golf course, which is pretty interesting, especially the year that politics in Panama were pretty lively, and they could hear gunshots from downtown Panama. So that's when the military put a guard on the summer camp. Well, I'm walking around Nowak, and I see a scout walk past me wearing a Cherokee Lodge neckerchief. Wow. I start talking to him. He said, "You want to meet my dad?" I said, "Sure." He takes me back to the dorm, introduces me to his father. Mr. Fisher was the head of the high school down there. And he told me that as American employees of the zone got replaced by Panamanian employees, and as the military bases gradually got closed, the population was going down by like 10% every year. So it got to where the council was closed and became Panama Canal District of Direct Service Council. When that happened, they didn't have GAMBOA Camp anymore. They just had summer camp. Now, what are these? Panama has 3 scouting organizations: Panamanian Boy Scouts, American Boy Scouts, and International Boy Scouts, who are the kids of descendants of people who went to work to build the Panama Canal. And these are patches from International Scouts that they kind of borrowed to use for summer camp patches. Well, here we are down in Panama Canal District, and the last patch I have with a date on it is 96. The military bases I showed you were pretty much all shut down in 1999. Me and my two friends went down for a weekend. We visited an OA event down there. We've been to Camp CHAGRES. It was awesome. Their brotherhood ceremony had 5 bonfires and 115 candles. It was amazing. We went in March. It was a dry season, not a single mosquito. And that's it. Any questions on obscure Florida camp patches? Nico, you got anything to add?
No, I think you covered it, other than you didn't show my favorite camp patch, which I will show when Johnny asks us to. But other than that,
What was it, Tico? Let me introduce Tico. Central Florida's first full-time scouting professional was hired from Southeast Michigan. He came down and brought with him the Chippewa Honorary Society, which had existed there. And he brought up the concept of having a summer camp patch. Show him the patch, Tico. Camp Wewa, CEW, which was very close to the summer camp patches they'd had back down in Michigan. And there's little things that got added to the corners of the patch. And one of those little things added to the corner of the patch is a red teepee. Does that teepee mean that you were in the Chippewa Honor Camper Society, which is $10,000 patch you see to the right there? Does putting that little red teepee on that felt arrowhead make that a Chippewa Honor Society patch? Tico said yes. I say, shh, keep it quiet.